I myself, I do have a superpower. And I'm going to tell you right now, it is failing. I am tremendously good at failing. My entire life, I have been set up to fail. And you're wondering, like, how is this possible? Well, the educational process is this well-rounded process, and what you are looking at right now is the perfect example of a square peg being shoved through an educational process. And I was always asked by my teachers, what's wrong? Why won't you fit? In first grade, my teacher came to me and said, read this. And here I was in first grade, and I'm stuttering, right? And I'm fumbling over the word. She said, go see Mrs. O'Brien. You need some extra special help. Okay, so I go see Mrs. O'Brien. And Mrs. O'Brien says to me, she says, Anthony, we're going to go slower so you can catch up. And I turned to her and I looked at her and I said, Mrs. O'Brien, how am I going to catch up if we're going slower? She said, Anthony, go back to class. And so at that point, I turned around and went back to class, and what I realized is that there's this circle of information that my classmates were on. And every single time the grade changed, the amount of information expanded. And these people were on this track, and they're riding these bikes, man. They got it. They were on top, and they're just going, and I'm sitting there, and I'm going, well, I don't understand. I really just am not understanding. And what I noticed is I was starting to understand not understanding, which is fundamentally a paradigm shift in how you learn and how you think about things. Now, I'm going to introduce you to OVE, and you are probably asking yourself, what is OVE? This is of. In 8th grade, I finally conquered the word of. When I go to read, sometimes I have no memory of exactly what the word is. I can't pull it to my mind. So I have to reinvent it or rewrite it every time. So every time I go to write something or express something, and when I was in school, this was before we were typing everything and writing things down. So when I go to write something, teachers would look at it and they'd be like, this is average at best, congratulations, you're average. So I conquered of in the 8th grade. I was now ready for high school. And this is what high school looked like to me, right? There was all these people, and they all had these tracks and these ideas, and they were on road to something. And here I was sitting there, and what I got good at is I got good at connecting the points between ideas. I didn't necessarily have to understand how to say it and how to write it down, but if I understood where they connected and where their similar points were, I could then talk to people and kind of get out of their way as they were passing me by, which was okay, right? Because I was starting to accept there's going to be a different way of thinking. So then I got to college. And when I got to college, I started seeing these people, they had these massive amounts of ideas floating around. And I knew I could not keep up. I would never ride the bicycle. And what I started to notice is if I just stepped very carefully, I could see what this person was doing and what this person was doing, and it developed into these school of thoughts. And what I noticed is that these school of thoughts are all looking at different realities. One might be science, one might be art, anthropology, but they're all looking for something. And they were looking through this path, and they were looking for and through these lenses, right? So what I started to learn is that I was never going to make it that way. And you're wondering, well, how did you end up through? What were you studying? I was studying engineering. And I was tutoring people in differential equations and math, and they'd go and they'd take the test and they'd come back like, how'd you do? And they'd be like, I got an A, I got a B. I'm like, good job. Like, how'd you do? I'm like, well, I got a C minus. I think I got to retake the class again. And they were like, but you showed me how to do this. I'm like, I know, I just can't write things in a row. So I kept going, and I was 23 at the time, and I got sat down with the dean of engineering, and he says, Anthony, this is the 3rd time you've taken statistics. And I said, I know, statistically that's not very probable that I'm going to pass engineering. And he said, not everyone's cut out to be an engineer. I'm like, I know, but the statistics test, I have to write the numbers in columns going down, and I just can't transpose from this line to this line. It's just, I don't do this. And he said, well, there's probably something wrong. And I said, well, I got tested when I went into high school, and the guy said, there's something wrong with Anthony, and I do not know what it is. He said, but, He'll be okay. And apparently he was wrong, because I wasn't okay, right? I went off and they did a little bit more testing on me, and they found out that I had a solution. There was a solution to what my issue was. I was considered a type 8. Now there are 7 classes that they classified people with, and type 8 was other. So when the lady got done with everything that she said, she says, well, we just don't know what your deal is, but you share enough problems with everybody that you have this unique conglomerate of all the things that people don't understand, which is great for me, because I like to teach, I like to explain things, and what I found out is that all the ideas that we're learning as creatives often get shut down by people not understanding, or when they start to say, oh, I just don't get it. And that's where I tune in the conversation typically. When the person is lost in the audience, or one of my students is lost, that's where my mind goes, why are you disconnecting? I can see you losing pace with what's happening here. Where did you go? When I reflect back into these things, I was sitting in this man's office. I was 23 years old. I had received my 3rd patent. I think that was for superheating steel inside microwave ovens. This man was telling me that I would not be a good engineer. This man was telling me that I wasn't capable of doing these things. I started off about 20, just designing parts, and I was a designer, and eventually ended up being the head of new product introduction. Basically, I went around to different divisions of the company, and I said, okay, you guys are doing this and this. Have you ever thought about combining these things together? Or what is something that you've always wanted to do, kind of thing. So what I learned is that we have lenses, and these ideas and these fields have different lenses. Now this is me. I am this lovely circle of perspective. What I learned is that circles make squares, right? And I learned that when I talk to somebody, I have a reality and they have a reality. And when we share a reality, I see a portion of myself in them. They see a portion of myself in me. And then when we add a person, we start adding more points. And as we add more and more people, the points become more complicated, right? There's a center where it starts to get a little bit confusing, but we kind of understand each other. And you start ending up with all these areas and like these different shades of gray. You know, not 50 shades of gray, but, you know, an adequate amount shades of gray. And they start converging to all these little areas right in the middle. And then when I started to realize, I'm looking at all these different viewpoints, and I realized the disconnects, or where they're connecting, is they're connecting with little squares. So all these circles of thoughts, right? Where they disconnect, where the person doesn't feel like they have value in the conversation. We have told them, you're not creative. Go sit down. You're not going to be this. Go sit down. Those are the first people you do not listen to. Every one of you that is here in this room is incredibly awesome because you're an innovator, you're a thinker, and you're capable of amazing things. That's why this type of place even exists. I'm going to tell you a story about a guy I used to work with named Keith. He was the most negative man ever worked with. I loved working with him. Absolutely adored it. And I got called into the office by my boss, Joel, and he said, Anthony, the GM team has this problem. Light bulbs are exploding inside the headlights, and they need to clean it, but it takes too long to take the headlight off the vehicle. They've been working on this for 3 weeks. Please go over there, talk to them, see what you can do. I walk in the room, and it's all engineers as usual, and I said, all right, guys, I want to hear nothing that makes sense. I don't want to hear anything at all. You've been working on this for weeks. Tell me something that does not make sense. And Keith, he's like, I think we should train little mice with rags to crawl in the light bulb hole and clean it. He essentially solved the problem. That would have been great. So I drew the mouse, right? I put it on there with a little bit of rags and just went in there. And I said, well, let's make the mouse felt, because that's what a mouse looks like. Let's put metal inside the mouse. Okay, let's stick a magnet on the outside of the lens that we can control the mouse with. And so we literally threw this mouse-shaped thing inside the hole, cleaned the exploded lens, pulled it out with a little bit of a metal rod, and it was done. It was under 5 minutes. right? But at this point, they had developed 4 fixtures, this thing to come in and clamp, this other 4 thing would unbolt 6 screws at a time, and it really needed a mouse with a rag. And as creatives, as someone who's quintessentially understands not understanding, who understands that when there is a person in the room who is not talking, it's either 1, because they're thinking, or 2, because I failed to connect with them. And I failed to realize the potential of their creativity. Now, you brought up the point of my basking shark. I am so glad you brought that up. This turbine that I designed is just based on observation, seeing something swimming and moving, and appreciating the shark for what it was. It's 6 billion years of evolution that captured and moved energy exquisitely. And all I did was lop off its head, and I put a turbine blades inside, and I just let the water flow through it, let it do what it naturally did. And it worked fantastic. It did improve by about 40%. And it's these types of things, like people, if I were to tell someone, hey, I'm going to make this turbine based off this shark, I'm guarantee that guy would have said, this is not how this works, right? And I absolutely know that every single one of you out there have had those ideas, right? I've had probably 350 some odd failures of my 900 things that I've attempted to design. And each one of those probably had a revision or 6. And every time someone would say, we have this problem and we don't know how to solve it, and it's not going to work out, or you don't have the skills to understand this yet, I would say, okay, I'll be back in 5 minutes. And I'd come back with some kind of little neat sketch for them. And it's all about understanding yourself and understanding this, the lens. My lens has changed. The color of my lens has changed. It's still a completion, right? And every time my ideas become complex or somewhat convoluted, I learn that it's okay to change my lens, to go back, adjust my perspective, because it's okay to be a square going through round holes. And I'll leave you with this. If you are a square and you're being forced to a round hole, remember, squares make points on all 4 sides. All right? Thank you very much.